Hi everyone, welcome back to the All Inclusive podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Elena Richards, Chief Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer at KPMG. We discussed KPMG's top priorities for fostering a diverse and inclusive workforce. Elena shared insights on implementing effective DEI strategies, creating environments that truly foster belonging, and engaging and supporting diverse talent within organisations. We also explored KPMG's approach to building a pipeline for diverse leadership and discussed future trends and challenges in DEI. As always, before jumping into the video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell, and follow on your favourite podcast platform so that you never miss an episode. That being said, let's jump in. Hi, Elena.
Good morning, Natasha.
Good morning. So glad to see you today. I'm so glad for you to join the podcast. I'm excited for this conversation.
I appreciate you having me.
Great. So let's kick things off. Tell our listeners a little bit more about you and your journey into DEI leadership.
Sure. So I'll start way back to West Indian parents from the island of St. Martin. They came to this country, the United States, in the 1970s. And they came to another island, Staten Island, one of the 5 boroughs in New York. And that's where I grew up, my brother, sister, and I. So big family. My mom is one of 12. My dad is one of 8. And in that, you know, how to deal with other people really quickly. And the one unique thing about the background is most of our family speaks French. But when you come to the US and you're trying to fit in, especially in Staten Island where I grew up, they didn't speak the language. So we grew up speaking English, go home to visit family, and always being sort of on the outside because you never really understood what your cousins were saying because that was what they spoke every day. So big family, large community. But the one thing we found that Staten Island was for us was a place where family had to call before they showed up. So remember, long before cell phones, long before when you grow up, you just stop in on family, which is what they did back home. They couldn't necessarily do in Staten Island. So they had to call because they had to pass a body of water. It wasn't just a quick subway or you get in the car, you have to drive over bridges. So that's one of the ways that I say my diversity journey began. But then it progressed, going to schools. My sister and I were predominantly the only students of color in our classes growing up for most of it. Then I went to SUNY Albany, upstate New York, got more diversity with friends, colleagues in classes, projects, and then I worked for an organization called Inroads that placed talented minority youth in companies that I worked for. I started in professional services as a resource manager, and that is really like a deployer HR person. And then I spent 21 years, and I was a pandemic hire, hired in November of 2020 after George Floyd, after a lot of social reckoning and unrest, and obviously a global pandemic, to become KPMG's Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer.
That's an inspiring story. I can resonate a lot from the West Indian background. My mum is Jamaican and so is my dad. And my grandparents pretty much raised me and my sister because my mum was a single parent. She was working a lot. So I totally understand family coming unannounced and arriving.
Stopping by.
Yeah, just stopping by. So yeah, no, I understand that. And I think when you're all close by, it's just a natural thing. But right. Once distance becomes a thing, you do kind of need to plan those things a little bit. And I also too in education felt like I was amongst a very few in my class that looked like me, which I agree is that's like kind of the first introduction to you understanding that your world isn't full of people that just look like you. Because I feel when you're from a very large family and in the West Indian culture. Like everyone, majority of my family, everyone just looks like me. We're all brown, and the area that we lived in was full of brown, a lot of brown people, but a lot of coloured people. And so it wasn't until I entered school where I was actually in an environment where I was like, oh, okay, like I'm the minority here.
Right.
That's interesting. So given your extensive experience, what would you say is an area where in DEI that leaders aren't talking enough about?
Yeah, I would say when you think about intersectionality would be one, because oftentimes in Natasha, your example of being around our West Indian families, oftentimes you're viewed as a monolith, like we're all the same, not understanding and appreciating that we're two Black women, right? And that we have very different upbringings, the different paths, and everybody feeling like that's the same. So what's unique about me and the ways of which they intersect, I think is something that from a diversity perspective that we can all do better. People oftentimes want to put people in buckets, and we're not. And getting to know individuals at a more human level, I think, is the work still before us in ways that we could be better. That intersectionality, because it's also very fluid, it changes. When you were talking about being raised by a single mom, now I'm a single mom, right? I'm divorced. I have a wonderful 16-year-old, almost 16-year-old daughter. And that becomes very different in my experiences now, right? When you think about working and taking care of her, um, it's just, and it over time, it does also change. And I think we have to remember what's most important to individuals during different paths or points in their life.
Definitely. And how do you see that impacting the programs and the initiatives that leaders then put in place for an organization?
Yeah, because you have to think about that intersectional lens when you're building programs, right? Or different things. You also have to think about how are you creating an environment that's welcoming. And so one aspect of that is making sure that you're engaging everyone in the journey, that it's not my job or the DEI team or the HR team or my chair is responsibility. It's each of our responsibilities to create the environment that we make for the people around us. It's a big part of our strategy when we think about engaging everyone in what we're trying to accomplish as a firm. When you let people off the hook, is sort of it becomes somebody else's responsibility.
Yeah, and I think that's a great perspective, and I think it does lead me to kind of think a little bit wider in terms of like how critical is it that we consider how we are treating others when we are in the workplace and even just outside of it.
Yeah, that's it is critically important, and one of the things that you think about is how do you create the concept of psychological safety, a space where everyone sort of feels like they can belong in the organization, where they can show up authentically as they are, where they feel safe to voice their opinions, feel safe to take on projects and efforts that are going to help grow their career, getting outside of their comfort zone. How do you create that environment where you can do that? That is the big part of when I say it's not just a person's responsibility. It's really everyone trying to create that space, right? And make sure that everybody truly belongs. Because when we work, we're working in teams. You work in teams of people. You don't leave the organization, you leave the teams of people that you work with. And so I often find that people feel like this is so big. It's those individual experiences that we create for the people that work around us that really sets us apart from whether or not I feel like I can do the work and I feel supported to do the work and then show up, and obviously give you the best product so that we could deliver to whomever is expecting it.
Yeah, definitely. And so what have you found is working for you? So we're talking about psychological safety, creating that
Yes.
environment where people feel that they belong and that they can air their opinions and they can really thrive. So what strategies or programs have you created that you found that, yes, this is working, this is something that is moving us forward?
Yeah, it's when people understand that they are impacting someone's experience. So sharing that, right? We have one of our 5 priorities, and what we're trying to accomplish from a DEI perspective is engaging everyone in the journey, saying that, it's not just, my job or someone else's job. It's each of our jobs to create that team. What are we doing to make everyone feel included on that team? That means when you think about training or programs for people to learn more about themselves, how am I learning as a leader to be a more inclusive leader? How am I thinking about the environment that I'm creating? So we do have a learning path where people can learn more about what we're bringing to the table about yourself. So it's a little bit about self-awareness, but it's also about then also what am I bringing to the team? So that engaging everyone's a big part of that. The other part is really thinking about the different ways of which we make the organization available to others. Are we bringing more diverse talent to the firm? Not thinking of it as in a monolith. Like, what are we doing to actively do some of those things? An example of that is, we recruit quite a bit from some of our historically Black colleges and universities. How do we mirror that with also trying to bring more diverse access to things that we know we're not necessarily involved in? So one of the things I did when I was growing up is I ran track during school. And I think track is always the great equalizer because you show up as yourself, you learn a lot about yourself, but then you also are on a team if you're doing relays. And I felt like it was a good um, outlet for me as that middle child. I was always out running and on the team. But the ways of which we run, and you see, it's a universal sport, and especially this year when you think about the Olympics coming. But students that are also going to school running, it is great for time management. It is great at building teams. It is great at leadership. So one of the things that we do is we are sponsors to this HBCU showcase. We host it over Martin Luther King weekend at the Armory at a facility in New York that is one of the world's fastest tracks. And what does that provide? It provides an opportunity for runners that are very focused, students also, student athletes, on running another opportunity to beat their personal best. It gives them an opportunity to show up on a track and a world renowned track, and maybe hold a meet record or a world record, right? If you give them that access on the track, it is giving space for them to do their best. But they also get to learn a little bit more about our firm, what we do as a professional services firm. Not many people even know what KPMG is, right? It's 4 letters. And what we're trying to do is bring more access and opportunity to the sport so that they know a little bit of what a career in professional services could offer. So that's one unique example as a way to get to more students, but also for them to see a little bit more about what we do. And that's part of the reason why we sponsor this showcase. It is trying to get more access and opportunity to students. So that's just another example or one example.
That's amazing. I also, well, in England it's called something different. It's like athletics. But yes, I also did track in school. I loved it. I love running. Sprinting was my favorite thing, and I agree. I think it's amazing what you've done and what you're contributing to. It's definitely going to be impactful for the children that are taking part, and for the industry that you're in, with which KPMG is known for not being as diverse.
Yes.
I think it's important that you are intentionally trying to create space for others
to learn,
mm-hmm.
right? That would not necessarily. And so the Armory is another place. It's located in Washington Heights. So when we think about diverse talent, it also reaches Hispanic, Latinx talent, right? And so in these diverse communities, again, have no idea what those 4 letters mean, it is a way to create more access, to understand what the firm does, to understand what you know, careers we could provide. And so that is our hope, and why we get so invested in some of the communities of which we serve, is because we're also trying to help the community, but also show that there's access to what potentially could be a career in the firm.
Great. And so I'm just going to loop back in something
Please.
that you had said regarding KPMG, what your goals are for DEI. You mentioned 5 pillars. So we discussed making sure that everyone feels included is one. Could you just give us a little bit of a rundown on those other 4?
Yes. So I'm going to say I started, there's actually 3 pillars. And I try to circle the pillars in our, if you think about talent, it's a talent life cycle. Getting here, succeeding here, and leading here. And in that, we have 5 priorities. Try to keep it really simple. So getting here, succeeding here, and leading here are pillars. And when we think about the 5 priorities, one is all about talent attraction. How do we bring more diverse talent to the organization, and think of KPMG as an employer of choice? So talent acquisition and onboarding, how do we do that as one? So I described the HBCU showcase as one of those, increasing the aperture for more people to think about what this firm does. That's number 1. Number 2 is all around what we talked about, engaging everyone, not letting anyone feel like this is your job, Natasha, or if you were with us, it would be your job or my job, right? It is everyone's responsibility to be engaged in that journey. The third is around a consistent experience. We should be making sure that everyone has the opportunity to give or have access to what this firm has to offer. And so that consistent experience is what we're trying to strive for each and every day, about giving the ways of which we distribute work, the ways of which we recruit talent. How do we broaden that? And so that is the engaging everyone in consistency of experience. Number 4 is, how do we build a pipeline? So when we think about the ways of which talent grows, you want to make sure that people are growing in their own way, but we need pools of talent to be future seniors, future managers, talent, and all the way up to partners, directors, and of the like, right? So how are people really making it to each of those career stages? That's number 4. And then number 5 is, we're going to do that with a level of transparency and accountability. And that, by that, I mean, every year we release a what we call our impact plan. We hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we're looking ourselves in the mirror each year on the progress. We set out with some aspirational goals, and that by 2025, we want to be different as a firm. And so that's our way of making sure that we're staying true to that goal. So a level of transparency and accountability. So those are the 5. You know, the interesting thing is that people sort of say, okay, well, what's your next 5? We're not moving on from these 5 until we see that we've made some progress on those 5. And so consistently applying the 5 priorities across those 3 pillars is what we're centered around here at the firm. And we try to keep it simple so that everybody knows that we're working towards the same goal as a firm.
Those priorities sound great. I know that they probably aren't always easy to meet and it's probably been a difficult road with some challenges but also some successes. So could you elaborate a little bit more on one of those challenges? What's been an area that you have come across a bit challenging, which you wasn't quite expecting?
I think you can never underestimate starting a job during a pandemic, right? And so having worked in professional services for now almost 25 years, the power of relationships and building those relationships are so important. And for the last few years, we've been doing that over this screen. And so I like the fact that we are now in offices more, that we're communicating, and that helps you build some of those relationships. What I also like is that it is also a way that we can connect people across the globe. So one of the things that I didn't necessarily expect was that there was so much warmth on these screens that you can create community and that you can extend certain things. So our BRG communities have been able to, those are our business resource groups,
Yeah, I was just
have
about
been
to.
able
Great.
to, sorry, I know we always talk in acronyms and I'm trying to stay away from that.
No,
But
no, that's fine.
our business resource groups were able to try to connect and bridge topics and do that over time. And so that was the thing that I didn't necessarily think that we were going to be able to accomplish that, but I've been pleasantly surprised on the communities that we've been able to build virtually in this new hybrid way that we work. And that's been really important. But I did not expect that early on, and I thought that that was going to be a challenge. But we've been able to even cross. So our African ancestry is one example group has been able to do things with our network of women. So it's the KPMG network of women. It's called No, our No group and our African ancestry. They've been able to partner and do different things across the months.
Oh, that's great. And I guess it kind of does tie back into the initial conversation that we had, which is about intersectionality.
Correct.
So because
That's right.
I'm not just simply
Right.
a black person, I'm also a
Nope.
woman. And yeah, so it's great to hear that your business resource groups are seeing those connections and that you're able to kind of work together and collaborate together, because I think it is definitely, as we've already said, it's going to take all of us to really intentionally move forward with inclusivity in mind in order for us to really reach our goals of DEI.
And the one thing that's really been helpful is that our business resource communities are not just open for the members, right? And so there was a conversation last week with our former chair, Lynn Doherty, was being interviewed by our general counsel. And so Tanya Robinson, was interviewing her. And what they talked about is just the ways that make them who they are and what paths they've taken. And the warmth of allyship, right? So it's not just the women on the call, but our men are great allies, and nothing we do is going to happen without great allyship, right? So bringing our men to the conversation equally is going to be critically important. And so it's open to members, learners, supporters, and allies. And that's one of the things that I've been proud of. We've grown that community to about 17,000 people, professionals in our firm. That's close to half are members of at least one of our business resource communities.
That's amazing. I'm going to say, like, how did you do it? Tell me now. There's been
Yeah, and it is really about trying to allow for people to come for whatever reason they want to come, right? So if I am not necessarily a member, but I want to be supportive of a colleague, or if I want to come and just truly learn, um, I'm allowed to come, and so that's why they're open to all. No one's restricted from becoming a member of our business resource community.
Oh, that's great. So, I mean, I can imagine it can be quite challenging to prioritize all of these initiatives. So, how do you do it? Like, how do you decide what goes first, what to do next?
So it is the five. So really staying centered on the five things that we talked about. I want to continue to make sure that we focus on intersectionality and think about what other ways that we might be missing other parts of our communities, right? I may not know. And as we evolve, the one thing I'll say about this work in the almost 30 years I've been in diversity work is that it evolves with time, right? And I mentioned the fluidity piece. I mean, aspects of our gender, aspects of our identities are all moving and shifting. And in this global landscape, I think we have to be really open to whatever that's going to be as time progresses. We are in a time right now when it has never been more complex. Everything is wrought with such divisiveness. I have to be really mindful of how are we making or creating a space where everyone is welcome, appreciated, valued on a consistent basis. that's going to be the great differentiator for us as a firm, where people are going to want to grow their careers. And I think it's going to only get more complex. We are in a space today, Natasha, when this world is going to go through 60% of elections. This country being one here in the US, but 60% of this globe is going to go through some sort of election this year. That's a lot of change. And that's impacting a lot of people. And we want the best and brightest of those people to want to start or grow their careers with KPMG. And trying to understand how each of those individuals show up, I want to make sure we're creating a platform for them to show up as they are, authentically them, and be able to do their best work. And so that's what I'm striving for every day. And I think that, you know, you want to also think about that in the context of what AI is going to be. You want to bring a human element to all the change, and be prepared and lean into all of our vulnerabilities and our discomfort, because the train is moving. It's just how quickly we catch on. And we don't want anyone to be left behind, I think, is probably the most in thinking about what's next. So,
Elena, I think that's amazing. I love everything that you've just said. I think it's so key that you are understanding the complexity of the world that we live in right now, and that it is ever changing and it is ever evolving. But those 5 priorities that you've got really are ones that you can apply as time goes on. Like, they're still going to be relevant,
correct.
which is amazing. And looking at the future and talking about as time goes on, what trends do you see coming forward in the future for DEI?
So it's truly that, right? So I don't know yet. I have no idea what's going to be the most important. I think of diversity as really thinking about, how are we protecting our most vulnerable populations? How are we making sure that we're giving space to everyone to grow authentically as who they are? And what I'm most excited about, but I'm also very nervous. So it goes with both, is what does this human centric design really mean when we think about artificial intelligence? Generative AI is probably the best way to say it. And how are we learning the skills that are going to be the most inclusive, right? How do we create spaces for people to grow? How do we create access, right? You want to make sure that everyone's going to be able to access these new technologies and be able to grow and live and hopefully accomplish the careers that they want. And so my job here is making sure, how are we thinking about that um, adoption in the next few years, because it's got to be not letting anyone be left behind. So upskilling on whatever it is, learning myself. So I'm trying to be a steward of learning what it means and how it will impact the work each and every day. So creating space for that is, I think, probably the most important.
Yeah, I think AI is a hot topic for sure, and it's going to be one for some time to come. We could probably have like a whole conversation just simply on
On
AI,
that,
just simply
correct.
on that. It's really interesting, and I am also of the same feeling. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to see what comes of it. But at the same time, there is some reservations in terms of what will that actually look like in practice, and whether are we going to be ending up taking, like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back kind of thing when it comes to applying that fairness, the unbiased elements to it, kind of, access, as you've said. So yeah, it's definitely a trend. I agree with you on that. I Elena, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. Like, it's been really great. I think you've given us some really good nuggets to think about, and some insights into the way in which KPMG are working towards creating that inclusive environment in the workplace, and really providing a platform for anyone and everyone to be able to jump on board with the work that you guys are doing over at KPMG. So thank you so much for joining me. Before you do leave us, I would just like to squeeze out one more piece one more piece of information from you. So before you do go, could you just give us one piece of parting advice for the DEI leaders that are listening today?
So one piece of advice for our DEI leaders is continue to have hope, right? That's what keeps us going in this space. Also, don't go it alone. As DEI professionals, I oftentimes feel like we're not competitors in this work because there's still so much to be done. And so, how do you create that community? And so, I always offer that if I can help anyone, no one's arrived and has gotten this all figured out, or many more would be doing better than we are today. And so, as DEI professionals, reach out and make sure you have hope and continue the journey. Because if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? We got to keep going.
Oh, lovely. I love that. Once again, Elena, thank you so much for joining me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I know many listening have also too. And until we speak again.
Well, thank you for having me, Natasha. Have a great rest of your day.